Namaskar. I'll begin with an apology. I can understand some Bangla, but I can't speak in Bangla. So I'll have to speak in English. I hope you'll bear with me. I was being asked to speak on distortions of history. But before I begin, there is just one thing that I wanted to share with you. I stepped out to smoke a cigarette, and while I was standing outside, three buses passed. One had Jai Mata Di written on. Now, the veneration of Durga Ma is a very old tradition in these parts, but Jai Mata Di is an import. The second bus that passed me had a huge trishul and a dambru. These are symbols which are not common to Bengal. And then passed the third bus. It had Shri Ram Rath written on it in Hindi. This is happening here. I don't come to Calcutta often. I probably come here after 3 or 4 years. This is happening. It is happening all around us. And how facts, when they are distorted, how they transform our understanding of our own culture. The way we think, the way we behave, the way we celebrate, everything will be redefined. That is what we are confronted with today. The other thing that I wanted to share with you was that the time for this event was 12 o'clock. We began at 2:30. If revolution was to happen at 12 o'clock, the revolutionaries will not be there to lead it before 2:30 p.m. A revolutionary organization cannot function like that. I think there are things that we need to look at seriously. But aside from these diversions, I'll now read my paper because I'm running short of time. I have a flight to catch. Otherwise, I would have probably taken longer to explain some of these things. So again, I request you to put up with me. I'm going to stick to the text. Facts are central to history. When we are talking of distortion in history, there are a couple of things we need to understand. Facts are central to history. How you interpret those facts is no less important. Interpretations of the same facts can give you separate and totally different histories, and I'll give you a couple of examples. A mere collection of facts is not history. How you interpret them, contextualize them, and present them, how you build a narrative, turns them into history. If you have neither the skill and training of a historian, nor do you have the facts at your disposal, what you create is pseudo-history. Pseudo-history is being generated daily in billions of terabytes by pseudo-nationalists. And you can easily access it on the WhatsApp University. Writing history, on the other hand, is a totally different kettle of fish. Before we come to the question of distortion of history, let me say a few words about what we understand by the term history. Is it just a collection of facts? And if so, who made the selection? And what facts were selected? will influence the kind of history that will be written. This needs some elaboration. For example, someone who does not believe in the history of evolution and the dispersal of the human race, the Homo sapiens, from Africa to eventually inhabit the entire world, starting about 70,000 years ago, is not likely to believe that the ancestors of all humans, including the Bhils, the Santhals, the Mundas, the Khasis, the Todas, the Gonds, the Naga, the Worli, the Bondas, the Garo, the Pauri Bhuiya, the Mishing, the Ravari, the Karbi, and hundreds of other tribes that inhabit India are descendants of the early migrants out of it, who started arriving in India perhaps about 60,000 years ago. While most of the non-tribals are later, much later arrivals in India, perhaps about or a little before 5,000 years. This is the map of India. Overwhelming majority of non-tribals have their DNA which connects to people who arrived in India about 5,000 years. The tribals have been here from about 60,000 years. What we call civilization is a construct of the last 6,000 years. Keep this in mind when you think of distortions in history. So you see, who's writing history and what is their frame of reference informs the historical narrative that they would build. The dominant tradition in history writing were narratives commissioned by kings and nobles, primarily hagiographical in nature, constructed narratives either of the lives of all conquering, just, generous, and beneficent kings, or commissioned narratives to run down and deprecate opponents. Both narratives were highly subjective and therefore not accurate as reliable sources of history as it unfolded. The authors of these accounts were beholden to the kings or were commissioned to write these biographies. The first courtly text that perhaps tries to rise above these limitations of commissioned histories was the Akbarnama and the Ain-e-Akbari. This text, authored by Abul Fazl in the early 17th century, tried to introduce the practice of supporting the author's assertions with references to official documents, courtly farmans, and actual data on land under cultivation, yield per acre, and sources of revenue. I'll just take a sip of water. There were two other important texts written before the Akbarnama. There is Taqbat-e-Nasiri by Minhaj Siraj Juzjani. It was written in 1260. And Ziauddin Barni's Fatwa-e-Jahandari and Tarikh-e-Firoz Shahi, written in mid-14th century. They were precursors to this tradition of history writing, but the Ain-e-Akbari and the Akbarnama make important departures in expanding their scope of objective reporting. A standard phrase in use these days, and all of you must have heard it, is the following: all history is the history of the victor. This phrase sounds very logical, but in fact it is not so. For every hagiographical account of the ruler that is privileged as history, there are others, not privileged, in fact ignored, suppressed, or deliberately erased, that carry counter narratives. Many of them were not written down, but remain in the memory of the people in small ditties, in poems, in suggestive tales, in writings of Sufis and saints. The job of a historian is to access all this material and to go through crime records, pursue judgments, study records that document grain production, sale price of grains, oils, fabrics, and other goods, amounts of taxes collected, salaries paid, records of civil disputes of the times, and about the conditions in which the people survive. From all this, the historian creates an impression of the times. This information is then compared to what the rulers got written about their rule, but also what their contemporaries write or say about it. With all the facts at their disposal, supported by the available evidence, using their training and skill, the historians create a plausible narrative. Like a highly skilled investigator reconstructing a scenario that they were not witness to. The scenario emerges from their interpretation of the available evidence. I'll give you one example of how the same set of facts can give you two totally different pictures if you interpret the facts differently. I'll give you both scenarios, same facts, but two interpretations, totally different, in order to highlight the importance of interpretation of facts. You must have heard of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. He is normally described as a mad king. You must have heard of the phrase of Tughlaqi Farman, an order issued by Tughlaq that made no sense. He is presented as a medieval despot, invariably presented as mentally unstable, someone who shifted his capital several hundred miles twice, who tried to replace gold coins with copper coins while retaining the same exchange value, who launched a harebrained scheme to build a great wall around his capital. This is the capital. This is the popular version. पागल आदमी था. एक दिन कहने लगा कि दिल्ली छोड़ दो और दौलताबाद चलेगी. दौलताबाद जाके 2 साल बाद कहने लगा वापस चलो. He forced everybody to migrate from Delhi, and then he wanted everybody else to migrate. Then he replaced gold coins with copper coins. Then he decided to build a wall around the capital city, huge wall. And it led to all kinds of economic complications, etc., etc. And that is why he's called a madman. Now look at the same facts and look at the other interpretation. Muhammad bin Tughlaq is probably the first ruler in this subcontinent who thought about war. And he thought that when an army comes and invades the capital, what would happen? The king will collect his family and his army and will retreat into the fort and close the gates. And then he'll sit there, waiting for the invading army to get tired and leave. That's why these great forts were built. And eventually, the supply line of the invading army will run dry and they'll give up. And that was the idea. But Muhammad bin Tughlaq thought differently. He thought that once I'm inside the fort and my army is inside the fort, what will happen to the villagers? What will the invading army do? They'll rape their women. They'll steal their cattle. They'll take their grains. And because they are frustrated, they can't defeat the king. So the consequence of that will be suffered by the peasants. So he decided to build a wall. Probably he got the idea from his prime minister, from one of his nobles, Ibn Battuta, who he had sent to China as his ambassador. And probably he came back and told him about this great wall. So he decided to build this. probably the first king who thought of what will happen to his subjects in case of war. The second, changing the gold coin with silver coins, with copper coins. It was a revolutionary idea. We have a 500 rupee note. What is the value of that paper? Before some years ago, we had a 2000 rupee note that was suddenly used as a weapon to finish black money in this country. We know what happened to black money. But the fact is that that piece of paper, which trades for 500 rupees or 100,000 rupees or 2000 rupees, its value is nothing, less than 15-20 paisa. But it exchanges in the market for a couple of hundred rupees or 500 or 2000 rupees. What is the principle behind it? Currency does not get its value from the value of the currency. It derives its value from the exchange power invested in the currency by the state. This principle was applied for the first time in India in the 14th century. Unfortunately, he did not realize how creative the Indian people are. Everybody started buying copper from the market, beating them into plates and making punch marks. And then they'll go to the treasury and say, take these 50 copper coins and give me 50 gold coins. In 3 days, his entire treasury was looted. And that is why he had to revert back to the gold coins. But the idea was so many centuries ahead of its time. Before the first currency note was introduced, there was somebody in Delhi who thought that the value is not the gold in the coin, but the value is invested, given by the state. Second decision. Third decision was to shift the capital. Why did he shift the capital? He thought that a king has to be in the middle of his empire, in the center. Delhi was not the center of the Tughlaq Empire. He had conquered all the way to the Kenya. And Bengal was part of the Tughlaq Empire. Ayodhya was part of the Tughlaq Empire, where the Babri Masjid was built. That was an architecture that developed in the Tughlaq period, the Sharqi architecture. So he thought he should be in the center of the empire. He went to Daulatabad, which is not too far away from Nagpur. Nagpur is the geographical center of India. He went there so that he could reach wherever he was required quickly. If he was in Delhi and he was required in the Dakhin, it will take him a month and a half to reach there. But from Nagpur, he could reach there in 20 days. He shifted the capital. He shifted the capital and the Mongols attacked, and he had to rush back. That is when he realized that the geographical center may not be the political center, and he had to bring the capital back. But there's nothing wrong with any of these ideas. You give one interpretation and he becomes a madman. You give another interpretation and he becomes somebody who's looking far ahead of his time. So all those people who keep on talking about this is the fact, this is the fact, this is the fact, there are problems with facts. Who has selected the facts and who is interpreting them and how you are interpreting. So when you talk of distortions in history, these are some of the things that you have to keep in mind. While you are deciding of whether Tughlaq is a madman or is a wise king, keep one thing in mind. This is something that was said 2,500 years ago. And it is one of the greatest things that has been said about knowledge. And this was said by Buddha, Siddhartha Gautam Shakyamuni, 2,500 years ago. In one of his sermons, he said, believe nothing, no matter where you read it or who said it, no matter if I have said it, unless it agrees with your own reason and your own common sense. This is crucial to remember. No matter how forcefully something is told to you, even if the person is 75 years old like me, who looks very wise and all that, or the person is your father or your uncle or your teacher or your professor or your leader, if what they are saying doesn't make sense, don't accept it. Question everything. Question everything. It is through questioning that knowledge expands. Unquestioned acceptance leads us into situations where we are today. Question. So therefore, the historian, if she is true to her discipline, will sift through all the available evidence and will draw her own conclusions. Conclusions that are based on serious consideration of all the available material, and then she will build her narrative. The historian knows that her narrative is not the final word. It may be modified or significantly altered if and when new evidence crops up. Remember, history is a science. Science does not deal in certainties. Science celebrates failures because failures open the doors for expanding knowledge. Certainty is religion. The only thing that is certain is religious belief. If it is science, it has to be prepared for failure, investigation, and new presentation. And a historian knows this. It is this awareness and the knowledge that history, like all sciences, is evidence-based, and new evidence can alter the conclusions that you have reached. A historian, unlike a zealot, is not afraid of evidence that challenges her theories. And that is why historians rarely say, this is what happened. Listen to any historian speaking or writing. They never say, this is what happened. A historian normally would say, perhaps this is what might have happened. Or maybe this is how that happened. Because they are talking about a time when they were not present. They are not eyewitnesses. They have shreds of evidence, unconnected, scattered, about all kinds of things. They go through all that. And after pursuing all that, they come to an idea of what was the life at that time. When somebody tells you that so many thousand elephants were used in such and such battle, and there were so many thousands of horses who were drawing chariots in that war that lasted for 18 years, and it took place at Kurukshetra, they all have very certain figures. What does the historian say? Where is the evidence? Where is the evidence? Have you found a single arrowhead? A single broken wheel of a chariot? A single horseshoe? which will tell you that this was a battlefield 5,000 years ago. That is the job of the historian. And therefore, raising questions, raising doubts is crucial to any scientific discipline, and it is as crucial to history if it has to be accepted as a science. Unlike a historian, those trained in the WhatsApp university insist that they know what happened at any time, despite the fact that they have no idea, because they have not read anything except fake stories written by those who have never studied history, nor do they have any idea of the historical method. I'll give you one example. It's a very funny example. There was a gentleman, fortunately he is no longer among us, P.N.O. He is the resident historian of those who are ruling this country right now. P.N.O. never studied history. He studied law. How deeply lawyers in this country are studying their own law, we know. But he decided to become a historian. He set up an organization for rewriting history. Now, when I was being introduced, somebody was talking about rewriting history. These people are not rewriting history. These people are inventing history. And that is a distinction you need to remember. P.N.O. played with words. He was a great, very, very imaginative person. His thesis was, which is the present thesis of those who rule us, that we are the Vishnu. Anything that makes sense anywhere in the world was originated here. So, P.N.O. says Christianity is actually Krishnaniti. Now, he doesn't have to support his claims with any evidence, any cross-reference. He says it, you have to believe it, because he knows, he knows everything. So, he makes a statement in one of his writings that our ancient sages had discovered the secret of atomic energy. And they had made intercontinental ballistic missiles. Evidence? No. He says is you have to believe it. But our sages, they were our sages, very wise people. They knew that these nuclear weapons have a problem of radiation. So the weapons cannot be stored anywhere where people live. So you have to find a place which is nirjan, uninhabited. So they found an island where nobody lived. All these ICBMs were placed there, thousands of kilometers away from India. He doesn't explain how will those weapons be used in war if they needed them, because transporting them from so many thousands of miles is going to take time. By that time, you might be defeated. He doesn't get into these details. So an uninhabited island was selected and all these intercontinental ballistic missiles were kept. The place came to be known as the home of weapons, Astra Alay, which was corrupted by the Europeans into Australia. I'm not joking. This is all written down in P.N.O. books. He's written a whole lot of books. He says that the hero of the Mahabharata, Arjun, was an extremely generous man, extremely generous. He was very happy with somebody, so he gave him a huge land grant. Over time, that land grant came to be known as Arjun Ka Daan. Arjun Daan, corrupted by the Europeans into Argentina. It is the same man who says the Taj Mahal is actually a Shiva temple. And its original name is Tejo Mahal. You pick up his books, your ribs will begin to burst with pain because you'll be laughing. He is the resident historian of these people. Now, you need to, when you are this attempts to rewrite history, they need to be ridiculed, they need to be exposed, but they need to be fought. Without that, I'm sorry, is going to get even more difficult. We need to confront this at every stage. There are textbooks in UP schools. You know what is happening to textbooks. What I'm telling you is a story about 50-year-old, almost 50, when I had just joined MA. My professor, who later became Vice Chancellor of Delhi University, Munis Raza, he told us this story. Textbooks of primary schools had come to him for his comments. And there was one book in Hindi for class 4, class 5 students. These were interesting stories which would help them improve their skill and also give them an understanding of India, cultural. There was one sentence in one book which he drew our attention to. बहुत समय पहले हिंदुस्तान पे एक बादशाह राज करता था. वो मुसलमान था किंतु बड़ा दयालु था. Now Munis said, Kintu, but is the result of the author's bias or his research. Both of them are questions. Because what is he telling a class 5 student? Muslim rulers cannot be dayalu. What is unstated is that Hindu rulers are dayalu. Being generous is natural to Hindus, and being cruel is natural to Muslims. If you find a generous Muslim, and now you can forget about kings. If you find an open-hearted, generous Muslim, he has to be an exception. This is how you distort history. This is how you distort your perception of the world. Now, the distortion in how the past is being presented to us are a combination of deep-seated subjectivity, a biased understanding of events of the past, and all-pervasive ignorance of what has made India into such a phenomenally diverse and inclusive society. And all this is combined with an abysmal ignorance of history. The fight against distortion of history, and since all of you, most of you are students here, and the one thing students who want to confront this have to do is to read. I will recommend that you read one of their most holy books. Read the Manusmriti. Seriously. All that you see unfolding before you, the attitude of the rulers, to women and the way they treat the dispossessed, the marginalized, it is all there in Manusmriti. Why do you think they keep on calling him the lawgiver? He is the lawgiver for an order in which only Brahmins will rule. In close collaboration with the Kshatriyas. So read the Manusmriti because you will understand whatever statement these people are making, this is where they come from. I'll suggest a couple of books which will help you understand what is going on. You might have, all of you would have heard, thousands of temples that were destroyed by Muslim invaders. There is a group of 6 or 7 very important historians, not only from India, but from all over the world. And they have studied this subject. This is a slim volume edited by Professor Sunil Kumar, who died 2 years ago, one of our most brilliant historians, an expert on medieval history. He died of a sudden heart attack. He has edited this book called Demolishing Myths or Mosques and Temples. Readings on history and temple desecration in medieval India. If you look for Sunil Kumar, Demolishing Myths or Mosques and Temples, you will find that book. It's an Oxford University publication. Pick it up. There is one very senior historian in America who has actually, he's an expert in Tamil, in Sanskrit and a whole lot of other languages. He has gone through thousands of documents to look for references of temple demolition. He has been able to identify 64, just 64, in the entire history of this country that were demolished. What is interesting is, majority of them were demolished by Hindus. Vaishnavas demolishing Shaivite temples, Shaivites demolishing Vaishnavite temples, and both of them uniting together to destroy Buddhist and Jain temples. These are aspects of history that we don't want to talk about. We don't want to talk about how suddenly Buddhism disappeared from this country. Before the Muslims arrived, Buddhism had disappeared. Who destroyed it? They did not disappear into thin air. These are questions that you need to ask and seek answers for. There's another book, the famous, most favorite whipping boy of these people, Aurangzeb. There's a slim book written by Audrey Truschke. It's not easy to get that book. You might be able to find it on Amazon. She's been given several death threats, even in America where she teaches. Aurangzeb, the Man and the Myth. Audrey Truschke. She has also written several other books on that period. All of them are worth reading. And then somebody called Niaz Faruqi, he has written a very interesting book called An Ordinary Man's Guide to Growing Up Muslim in India. And certainly read Ambedkar, all his writings, as many of Ambedkar's writings that you see. Because if this distortion of history has to be fought, they will have to be demolished intellectually first. Without that, it is going to be a very, very tough fight. They have to be ridiculed out of this circle which has begun to say, नहीं नहीं कुछ बात तो कुछ कह रहे हैं, कुछ ना कुछ तो सच होगा उसके. They are congenital liars, all of them. Thank you very much.
এই ভিডিওটিকে লাইক করুন, আপনার গুরুত্বপূর্ণ মতামত কমেন্টের মাধ্যমে আমাদের জানান এবং আমাদের চ্যানেলের ভিডিও সবার আগে দেখার জন্য ইউটিউবে গণশক্তিকে সাবস্ক্রাইব করুন, ফেসবুকে ফলো করুন এবং শেয়ার করুন আপনার পরিচিতদের মধ্যে। আমাদের চ্যানেলে আপলোড হওয়া ভিডিও নোটিফিকেশন পেতে বেল আইকনটি ক্লিক করতে ভুলবেন না।